Hi, everyone. I'm Carrie Cassidy from Project Camelot, and very happy to be here today. So I am here with Kaz, and she's reported already about this UFO incident at Pentyrch in England. And we've done actually 2 other shows, and I can give everyone the link on the page if you would go to my website, where this show will be posted later today. So it is wonderful to have you back on the show, Kaz. Thank you so much. And I'm going to bring on the banner just to sort of set the scene here for a moment, and everyone can see that. This is, again, the Pentyrch UFO incident, and today is April 1st, 2022. So our interviews in the past were on, I think, over 2 years ago, right?
Yes.
Okay, so can you go ahead and sort of, what we're going to do here is an update to sort of set the record straight as well, because there have been a few developments in, I guess, the UK, but also let's set the scene in terms of what happened as briefly as possible before you get into all the updates.
Okay. Hi, Carrie. Great to be here, and it's lovely to see you again. Very quickly, we had a military presence here for 3 days and 3 nights. They were clearly watching for something. We had a huge pyramid UFO that came through the space and jettisoned smaller craft. One of the objects was pursued by the military, and we believe it was shot down and crashed into the local woodland in Pentyrch. And since then, there's been a huge cover-up that's gone on. You know, it's been brought to my attention over the last 6 months that there's been an alternative theory put out there that this was just a military exercise. And without sounding patronizing, I want to show the difference this evening between an exercise and a real military operation that followed. We have all the documents through now to actually prove this was in no way, shape or form a military exercise. Okay,
very good. Well, that is incredibly brief. So you know, I think maybe tell a little bit about your role, and because you had quite an interesting role, and then there was another person who, have they ever come forward, or still not in the public eye?
Not in the public eye. They have spoken to people privately, but they don't want to be known publicly. We have had new primary witnesses come forward. They have made small statements because they say that their sightings were fleeting, but nonetheless, they saw these objects, they heard the aircraft. One of our witnesses is from the other side of the mountain. Such was the size of this pyramid that it was actually visible from the other side of the mountain, which I didn't know until quite recently. We have had a witness come forward from Pentyrch that saw an object go into the woods that night and the woods light up. That was a witness to the crash. My role in this is I was one of, I now know to be 4 primary witnesses in the village here to what happened that night. We were approached by 2 of these objects. I was scanned by one of these objects. There was a military cleanup, covert military cleanup crew that were armed that came here after the event that lied about their identity. And we now know that they were military, and we now know that they broke their own rules and regulations by lying about who they were.
Okay, so, but in terms of, there was a lot that went on, both during the sighting and then afterwards for several days. So maybe you can explain that a little bit, because I think people are not going to understand how they classified this suddenly as a military exercise. And then wasn't there a hospital down the road that also was affected directly by this?
Yes, indeed. Okay. The military pursued, well, 15 or 20 objects came out of this pyramid, including the first bright green object, which we now believe to be some kind of deliberate decoy that the military pursued, and pursued it west from here. There was a huge explosion. This is right next to a hospital. The hospital shook, physically shook patients awake in their beds. This was next to the Royal Mint, next to National Trust land where they should never have been, and over a residential area. The kinetic wave was so great from this explosion, it registered on the Richter scale 40 miles away in Monmouthshire. It also set the car alarms off in the neighbouring villages. This was a huge explosion. The military's explanation for that was that it was a simulated munition. You cannot place a simulated munition in the air, and it has no kinetic energy. Plus, they didn't have any permission to use simulated munitions over private land. Those are some of the objects that have been photographed here and filmed here since the event in 2016. We still have objects here now. There should be photographs on there of some of the objects that were actually pursued by the military that night. I'm not sure how clear they've come out. They're not in the gallery. You'll find them under the Carl Winston Witness on the webpage. It is on the website, and I've asked my web designer to move them around a little bit because you're not actually able to see them. It may be in the news updates and blog on the website under the Carl Winston Witness.
All right. So in the news, okay.
Yeah, click on that and then scroll down a little bit. And you'll see the Carl Winston. If you click on that, those are two of the objects that were, yeah, he's not moved them around, you can't see, but these are some of the objects that the military were pursuing that night. These were taken by an independent witness in Carl Winston, 9 miles southeast of Pentyrch. Some of the barrel-shaped objects are there, and you can see that these are not lanterns. These objects moved independently and with intelligence. We do believe that the pyramid is in the sky on one of the photographs. Unfortunately, we only actually have copies of them. If we had the originals, it could be enhanced to show the pyramid in the sky.
Okay.
This was a real event. Sure.
Well, this is amazing. Anyway, you do have some good photographs here, it looks like. Unfortunately, they're not enlarged, you know, they're not zoomed in, so we're not able to really get people to see. This would be part of the pyramid, is that correct?
No, that was an independent sighting separate to the incident that night that was actually photographed over the top of the Garth Mountain.
Wow.
These are just some of the objects that have been filmed here over the last 5 years. And we do have a lot, an awful lot. Right.
Okay, so I thought I'd just show that briefly. Now, can you talk a little bit more about, you know, I don't want you to have to go over the whole story because we've got 2 videos doing that, but I do want to sort of set the scene with the setup that they had, that they, you know, I don't know whether, what do you call them? Were they military that were set up on the hill there near your house?
Yeah, shortly after the event, we had some very strange men and women come and camp in the fields behind a thicket of trees. You couldn't actually see them from my home. And I only actually knew that they were there because of my local Pentyrch hub and other residents making comments about the different stories they've been told about who they were. One resident was told that they were a fracking survey team, which really didn't go down very well in the village at all. Somebody else was told that they were Vodafone, which is a mobile phone company. And that tweaked my curiosity. And I wanted to know who these people were. This is just a short while after the events here on that February night. And Stephen, excuse me, one of my friends had come over and I'd asked him to come with me because I didn't want to go alone. And we'd taken my small dog over to go for a walk. And as we approached the gate, which is behind my house that overlooks the farmland that ebbs away from you, there were 2 soldiers walking up the path towards us, wearing full digital camouflage and carrying real guns. There were no yellow caps in the end to suggest that they were carrying blanks. And these guns looked shiny and brand new, like they'd been stripped and oiled that morning. They certainly didn't look like they'd been dragged around on exercise anywhere. And we were told that they were doing a military exercise in case of an emergency situation if we saw anything funny going on in the fields. And I asked them if they needed guns for that, and they said, we do. And I asked why they were trying to hide them, because they were at this point trying to wrap them up in their jackets. And they said that they didn't want to upset the locals. Well, at this point, they'd been there for the best part of a week, and there were 2 armed sentries on the gate. Well, Stephen and I had walked down the trail a bit further, and we turned into the field where they were camped. And they weren't military tents. It looked like they'd gone into some outdoor pursuits place and ordered, 4 tents of those and 4 tents of those, and we'll have 2 of those, to make it look like they were civilians when in fact they weren't. And initially we started to walk around the perimeter of the field, and I said to Stephen, I'll sod this, I want to get closer. So we've cut across the field, and as we did so, we were charged by a large dog that I now know to be some kind of pit bull type breed, out of one of the tents. And this dog started to circle us, and I asked Stephen to pick my small dog up because I didn't want it to get bitten. And I could see 2 men in the camp. One was standing and one was seated in this green canvas tent. And I shouted, you're no country boys, are you? This is lambing season, put your dog on a lead. The farmer's got a shotgun, he's not afraid to use it. Well, with that, I had an answer, which was what? And that was my in, if you like. So we'd walked up the middle of their camp, and I took some photographs of their camp. And if it weren't for the few photographs that we actually have, there'd be no evidence to suggest those people were ever here at all. So I asked these people who they were. And their response was, well, who am I? And I said, well, I'm a local resident. So I asked again, who are you? And they told me that they were Vodafone doing field research, which was a lie. Vodafone don't really do field research. They were very reluctant to answer any questions at all. And the man seated was operating a laptop type device. It wasn't a laptop. This was in a steel case, about 1.5 times the width of a laptop. And he used 2 hands to close the lid of it. They didn't want me to see what they were doing. With that, Stephen and I had left. And as I got back to my home, Donna, one of my other neighbours, had come out to ask what was going on. And she was one of the people that were watching with us on the February night. And not content with the answers that we gave, she's taken my dog for a second time and walked down towards the fields, where they were searching the fields, wearing white paper forensic suits and blue coveralls on their feet. They were also using ground penetrating radar and other type devices that I don't even know what they were. They were operating one of those laptop type devices in the field. And at the end of the trail where the disused quarry is, they had a Jeep parked, and they had another one of those laptop type devices with a small rotating satellite dish next to it. It's only about 6 inches, maybe 8 inches big, not very big at all. Donna was able to get around and below them because the road for the quarry is actually lower than the trail that they were on above. And she was able to hear what they were saying, hurry up, find it, find it. They were desperate to find something. But they behaved very strangely, Kerry. When anybody would walk past, they would all stand up and stare at you until you were out of sight. And I did describe it like a weird cult 60s movie. David, the witness that was with me that night, questioned one person, and he kept looking around himself as if to make sure that there was nothing in his sight, and again, very reluctant to answer any questions whatsoever. I asked Gary Jones, who is the lead investigator in this case, to contact our local council to find out if any planning permission had been granted for a change of use of this land. And that would include a campsite. And he gave 2 years, anything between 2015 and the end of 2016, had there been any applications for a campsite or for a survey in those fields, anything. And there was absolutely nothing. So then we asked the Ministry of Defence who these people were. And their reply was that they had no information within the scope of our request. So we asked them what they were doing. And we had a Section 26, not in the public interest. Well, only the military can hide behind Section 26. But to lie about who they were is actually a breach of their regulations in an exercise. but I'll get into some of the regulations and the acts that they broke and rules and regulations and standing orders that they broke. Because someone said to me, oh, they made a few mistakes and they broke a few rules. No, they broke all the rules, and that's not a mistake. This was not an exercise.
Okay, I'd love you to do that, go into all of that. But I do want to ask you, so when you had the sighting, were those people camped up there before the sighting, or did they show up like a certain number of days after?
They came after the event. They weren't here before. The only aircraft that were here before were the small reconnaissance and surveillance aircraft that leapfrogged with each other to keep watch, if you like, for 3 days and 3 nights continuously. They did not leave the airspace unwatched for a single minute. No time has ever been issued for those aircraft. No exercise has ever been listed for those aircraft. And it took the RAF 38 months via a Freedom of Information request to even acknowledge that those aircraft were there at all. On a Freedom of Information request, it should have taken them 20 days to answer. 38 months.
Fascinating. Okay, so why don't you go ahead and launch into this sort of saga of regulations that they did break. And you know, there's a lot more to this story as well that I do want to get into. So go right ahead.
Well, the biggest mistake the military made was that this exercise, the so-called exercise, was over private land and not over Ministry of Defence land. And the Defence Infrastructure Organisation, the DIO, are the people that are in charge of everything. And they have a nice small document here that actually covers all the rules and regulations that they must follow for an exercise. If they train over private land, and this is all, I'll get into the sections, but units must pay particular attention to the prevention of noise, especially during silent hours, and inconvenience to civilians, including blocking of roads, tracks, and paths. And that's contrary to Section 37D of Training Over Private Land Act. But I think they must have overlooked that one, Gary. Exercises are not to be planned in areas where disturbance would be caused to local inhabitants in their homes. They were hovering helicopters over people's homes. One witness looked out their bedroom window and was eyeballing the pilot of a helicopter right outside of his window, you know. They must have, and this is the biggest thing, they must have written permission received from the landowner prior to any application for training over private land. Now, an application has to be made. Even if the Ministry of Defence want to do an exercise over private land, it doesn't mean they can. They must get written permission from the landowner. Well, the landowner in these cases was Rhondda Cunnintaff Local Authority, the local council. And they said via a Freedom of Information request, we refer to your Freedom of Information request in respect of the incidents of the night of the 25th and 26th of February 2016, which involved the supposed military exercise which took place in the area around Pentyrch Common to Pentyrch, an area in which the Royal Glamorgan Hospital and the Royal Mint are located. The authority was not made aware of any exercises in this area on those dates, so they weren't asked for permission. National Resources for Wales, the Welsh Government, went one step further when we asked them via Freedom of Information request, bearing in mind that all the roads and footpaths were closed. There was no permission granted to the military to close the woodland and the public paths and to let off explosives in the woodlands mentioned during these dates, or in fact, any dates. So we have no records. This type of activity would have required permission. So if it had occurred, we would have a record. Therefore, Regulation 12.4a, Environmental Information Regulations 2004 applies. No information is held. So they had no permission from the Welsh Government. There are other things that they must do. They must liaise with the public, the press, local government, National Resources for Wales, the Farmers Union, and the police prior to any exercise taking place. And we have a comment from the press, and they told us in a comment at 3:39 in the morning of the 26th of February 2016 that they were still working on a story about this, and we will post it as soon as we have it. So they didn't know anything either. Now, exercises in Wales have to be planned a minimum of 12 weeks before they are to start. And there are a lot of things they have to do. They have to do a full risk assessment of the land. There has to be a written environmental survey. And all of this, and there must be a recce of the area and maps, including routes and everything else. And this must all be completed before any application for training over private land can be granted. And even then, it might not be. But none of this was done. Nobody was told. In fact, I have a list of things. 1 second.
Okay, but let me ask you also, because I'm fascinated by the idea, and I remember you talking about this, of that they were, in essence, buzzing around the area, a small craft, as I recall,
Yeah.
for 3 days. In other words, before the incident actually happened. So that you, as a resident, must have kind of been like, that's like a heads up that something's going on, right? And even you and I assume the neighbors would have noticed this activity, perhaps even called someone, to complain.
We contacted the Ministry of Defence to ask because these aircraft were keeping us awake. And we didn't get a response from the Ministry of Defence. We also emailed the national press, or our local, we should say, Wales Online, which is our mainstream media here, if they knew anything, and they didn't respond either. It left us completely dumbfounded as to what was going on. If they'd answered us and said, well, it was an exercise going on, then perhaps we wouldn't have been out there watching. But because we weren't given any answers, we'd eliminated everything else. Clearly, they were watching for something, but we certainly didn't expect to see what we saw that night.
Right. So can you set the scene in terms of how it is? Because I think, as I recall, you ran out, or you went out to a fence that's a distance away from your dwelling. And was it the sound that brought you out, or what was it, or lights, or how? What was the stimulus that brought you and I think the other person as well out?
Right. Well, there were 3 of us.
Okay.
David and Donna, one of my other neighbours as well, also came to join me, and I'd lit the fire pit in my back garden. And we decided earlier in the day that if the planes were still there that night, we would go out and watch with them, because clearly they were watching for something. David was convinced that they were watching for Russian planes. And I know that sounds outrageous, but it was only the week before, on the 18th of February, that our RAF, our Royal Air Force, had turned away 2 Tu-160 Russian bombers from our airspace. So he was absolutely convinced that they were watching for something like a Russian plane and expected some kind of real life dogfight. He was quite excited by it. I'm not a plane spotter, so I wasn't. And we were watching this small aircraft. It was initially circling, and eventually it was doing this figure of 8 pattern that came over my house approximately every 7 or 8 minutes or so. And it got to about 2 a.m. on the morning of the 26th of February. And I said to David, look, I'm freezing. I'm tired. I'm going to go in. If anything happens, give me a shout. You're welcome to stay. Donna was in her house making us all hot drinks. And I had my hand on the back door handle of my house to go in. And I heard what sounded like a missile straight up. And I'd run to the back of my garden to see this huge plane go over the top of us. We had almost a full moon that night. It had just ebbed over the full moon. And this big plane banked to the left-hand side. And as it did so, you could see this mushroom-shaped object on its back. And David said, that's an E-3 Sentry plane, an AWACS plane. That meant nothing to me either. But this plane started to circle, not small circles. We estimated it took about 5 minutes for it to go around once. 7 times that plane circled. David said, well, maybe it's taxiing for the airport. Well, the only airport really large enough to accommodate a plane of that size would have been Cardiff International Airport, which is a civilian airport. On the 7th time that it went around, one red light became visible high above the trees behind my house. So I'd called for Donna. I didn't get an answer. I called a second time, still no answer. So I said to David, come on. We jumped over the small wire fence and we ran to the gate that overlooks the farmland that ebbs away from you, because Pentyrch's in an elevated position. We're actually at the top of a mountain, so the farmland ebbs away from you for miles. And the gate is about 30 seconds away from my house. It's not far. And one red light, when I say it turned into 3 red lights, it was 1 red light followed by 2 red lights to form a triangle. And then the leading set of 6 lights, as it emerged, it came through the space. It didn't come down from outer space. This came through the space and the military were waiting for it. This was a full-sized, 3-sided pyramid. Absolutely no doubt. I was not mistaken. These are not flares. I will get into that. This thing came in side on, and as it did so, it was turning very slowly anti-clockwise and came down in the upright position. When it had righted itself, this is all happening about 200 meters away from us. It's fired this green object out of the top like it's been shot out of a cannon, really fast. And it moved across to my left-hand side and above a thicket of trees there, the same thicket of trees that those military Vodafone people camped behind, and just stayed there, rocking, just gently backwards and forwards, not going anywhere, almost like it was surveying the area and us. I was fixated on the bottom of this craft. Don't ask me why, I don't know. I stood on the gate to get a better look through the bare trees as this pyramid listed to the right-hand side and still turning very slowly anti-clockwise, was moving away from us. And I said to David, it's landing, thinking it was coming down, when in reality, that is the foot of the Garth Mountain and the land was coming up to meet it. And as it neared the ground, it ejected this hand, I described it like a hand of lightning, and the whole thing lit up really brightly so that you could see it was a huge pyramid craft. You could see around the brightest lights, it illuminated parts of the side of the ship, not the entire side, but just around you could see that it was a solid craft and not a string of lights, for example. And whilst I was fixated on the bottom of it, David was looking at the top, and he said he saw 15 or 20 described as orbs come out at the top of this pyramid that just seemed to be dancing and mingling with each other around the top of this pyramid. And such was the size of this craft that whilst I was looking at the bottom of it, I couldn't see the top of it in my peripheral vision. This thing was majestic. It was huge. I heard the 2 military planes coming. I didn't know what they were. Huge planes flying wingtip to wingtip flew over the top of me. I only looked up for a moment just to see them go over. And when I looked back, I couldn't see the pyramid anymore. But that's not to say it wasn't there. I just couldn't see it. 2 other aircraft that had 2 big propeller engines on each wing came from my left-hand side. They too were turning and went back behind these, I now know to be 2 C-17s. So you had 2 C-130s out wide and 2 C-17s in close. And this green object, they were flying towards where this pyramid was last seen. This green object, the bright green object, has moved in a completely straight line along and in front of these aircraft and fired 3 really bright strobes at these aircraft, as if somehow to get their attention, to follow it. And then it got excited. And I described it like Tigger off Winnie the Pooh, how it bobbed and skipped rather than flew in a straight line. And it was quite surreal watching this thing go away from us, with the 4 planes all bathed in green light. You could see all the outline of their engines and fuselages as these planes flew west towards Llantrisant. And I watched it until I couldn't see it anymore. After then, we were approached by 2 barrel-shaped objects. They were completely smooth on the outside. They were capped with black caps on the top and on the bottom. They were red in color, towel-like red in color, and you could see all the insides moving. I described like white noise on a TV screen, but it was more 3D than that, like it was mixing in on itself somehow. They both came from my right-hand side. One moved across to my left and stopped above the hedge, maybe 20 or 30 feet away and maybe 20 or 30 feet up. And I'm still standing on the gate and I just stared at it just for a few seconds because I wanted the details. I wanted to see. And then I looked to see where the other one was, and that hadn't stopped. And by that time, that was right over the tree, right above us. I didn't know what to do. I waved. I mean, with all the military activity that was going on that night, I didn't want them to think that we were hostile. And this thing's changed colour from tail light red to traffic light green, and I could see even clearer the insides moving. And I felt it scan me. And that was the only thing I couldn't be tested for when I took the polygraph, because it was a feeling as opposed to knowing. But it felt like somebody had reached in and took that fear away from me. It was euphoric, like it had lifted me somehow, energized me. It was the most, I can't describe it, angelic feeling I've ever had in my life. And I did hear a man's voice, "Tell the world what you witnessed here." And I said, "I will." I didn't want to take my eyes away from it for a single second. The green object has moved away to my right-hand side across the rooftops, and the red object that had remained sentry the whole time moved away to my left-hand side and across the fields until I couldn't see it anymore. After that, David and I had walked down to what we called the second gate, where this pyramid had come in, because he'd said he saw 15 or 20 of these objects. We wanted to see if there were any more. It was so wet and slippery underfoot, and our phones did not work. David's phone has been completely fried. The battery on my phone was completely drained. I don't know how that happened. I know that it was fully charged when I went out there. I don't know if that had something to do with the E3 Sentry and the jamming capability that it has, or the extremely high EMF that was found after the event. I don't know. But even with a full moon, in the shadow of the hedgerows and the trees, the ground was pitch black. We didn't have a torch between us. When we got there, we couldn't see anything at all. Everything was black. We walked back to the first gate where we'd witnessed all of this, and we heard the Apache helicopters coming. There were 3 of them, one flying above 2 in a pyramid formation, flying from my left to my right on an interception course where that first green object had gone. We could see they were so low that you could see all the grass and the hedges being pushed flat with the force of their rotors. And we watched them until we couldn't see them anymore. When they'd gone out of sight, we ran around the front of the houses to look up the valley, but by the time we got there, they'd already gone. We went back to my house, and the E3 Sentry had followed us. And what I mean by that, it was above us the whole time when all of this was going on. And it was flying in an oval flight pattern, maybe 5 miles round. And when we walked down to the second gate, that oval flight pattern came with us. And when we walked back to my house, that oval flight pattern came right the way back to my house till we gone in.
So the E3 Sentry is a helicopter?
No, the E3 Sentry is an air control. It was actually a NATO aircraft. For control, it's an air control center.
Or small or large?
Very large, very large.
So when these, the red and green objects were moving around you, you're saying the E3 Sentry was there in the sky as well?
Yes.
And was it above them, presumably?
Yes.
Down on them?
It was at least 2,000 feet up. And as I say, you can see for maybe 20 miles in every direction but north, because that's where the actual mountain is. And I estimate that it was flying from us at least 5 miles out and coming round the whole time. And it was above the pyramid. It was above all of these other barrel-shaped objects that came out of it. It certainly saw what happened to us. It was there the whole time. When David and I went back to my house for a hot drink, I'd never been so cold in my life. We were the complete opposites to each other. I was energized, and David was almost catatonic, just sat there staring into the abyss, trying to make sense of everything. After he went home, I went to bed, not that I could sleep. And then we heard the enormous explosion. This was not a small bang. This was a boom, from 5 miles away. And I don't know how or when I fell asleep. I just remember waking up the next morning to David hammering on my door with this cover story that Wales Online had put out, that how military helicopters had kept South Wales awake in some kind of exercise. Well, I didn't know you weren't supposed to talk about UFOs. So I immediately launched into a comment to say, I can categorically assure you that was no exercise. What they were chasing were not planes. What I witnessed last night will stay with me for the rest of my life, and I will take a lie detector for anyone, anywhere. And as you know, I had the two debunkers, one calling themselves the Smoking Man, and the other one called himself Agent Fox Mulder, who both used fake Facebook profiles, trying to belittle what it was, or that's their little joke, But the more they said, the more I said, and they fell quiet very quickly. But I never actually made a full statement, which I've been, criticized for, I think.
What do you mean you've never made because we did a couple interviews and now you're talking to me. What do you mean by you haven't made a full statement?
On the comments on the day, I didn't write out a full statement. I made comments, a couple of comments, and that was it, but I didn't actually go into a full statement on Wales Online. That's what I mean by that.
Oh, all right. Now, was this explosion to do with the hospital? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Can you explain that? And also, I want to know, when you were talking about looking in a direction as to where these craft were going, right, after they left your area, were they going in the direction of the hospital or away?
The bright green object, the first object that came out of the pyramid, went towards the hospital. The other objects split and went in all different directions. But they had military helicopters, 20 military gunships, 20 miles out in a circle all the way around us with other aircraft.
Wow.
So it didn't matter in what direction these things went. They were met by military helicopters, including Pumas and Lynx and Merlin and Chinooks and Apaches, which is our best gunship in the world, which is the equivalent of having a tank in the air, and all at the same time. This was not an exercise, not including the C-130s, C-17s, fast jets, the two E-3 Sentries, one of which was from NATO, and all at the same time.
Okay, so then you heard the explosion though after you'd gone in your house, right?
Yeah.
And you didn't go out to check, or was it too far away? In other words, you could hear it, but you couldn't necessarily see the hospital from your land?
It's 5 miles away, so I couldn't see that at night, no.
Incredible. But there was some feedback from people at the hospital, right? With regard to—
Absolutely. Yeah. There were other comments that were made on Wales Online about the explosions, and it was all from Llantrisant, and more particularly Llantrisant Common. And I wanted to know what had happened to this green object. I wanted to go and find the impact crater. And so Llantrisant Common was my starting point at the other end, if you like, to find out what had happened to this object. And Stephen had driven me out to Llantrisant Common. David had gone in his own car, and all of the metal that had been on the common for years had been neatly picked up and stacked along the roadside, and yellow tape tied to bushes and trees across the common as if to segment it in search areas. And I now know that Chinook helicopters landed on Llantrisant Common, that there was a meticulous metal search conducted by the military, that helicopters circled Llantrisant Common for several hours with spotlights, and all this in what they call silent hours over a residential area. And when we asked the Ministry of Defence why they conducted a meticulous metal search in the early hours of the morning, why this could not have waited until daylight hours, we were told Section 26, not in the public interest. When we got to Llantrisant Common, we saw the metal, and I saw two people walking their dog. So I got out of the car and I went over to them, and bearing in mind, this is the morning after the night before, to see whether or not they had seen or heard anything. They told me about the Chinooks landing on the common. They also told me that the first explosion was an air explosion, and the second explosion sounded like something had hit the ground in Smilog Woods. The air explosion was also reported by the Daily Mirror newspaper in this country, and it made front page news as an air explosion. Because I wasn't from that area, I wanted to know where Smilog Woods was located, and felt very stupid when they pointed to the large wooded hill that rises behind the Royal Glamorgan Hospital. And we immediately went to Smilog Woods. And because I knew the trajectory of the green object, we knew roughly where to start looking. This is a 800-acre woodland on a mountain owned by the Forestry Commission. And it wasn't long before we found the debris trail. We have had witnesses come forward from the hospital. They said that the smoke was so dense after the explosion that it was coming through the windows and through the vents and filling the hospital corridors with smoke. One member of staff has gone outside and he said there was so much smoke it resembled a foggy night. Hospital security did not know. Under a Freedom of Information request, we asked the hospital about this exercise, and they told us they had no prior notification for this exercise. They received a phone call at 4:30 in the morning after this explosion to say their services were not required. Moments after the huge explosion, which was at 4:21 a.m., an Apache helicopter had to do an emergency landing at Cardiff International Airport, a civil airport with its cockpit on fire. After this, the Chinooks were going backwards and forwards from Smilog Woods to RAF St. Athan, about 14 miles away, being escorted now by 2 Apache gunships. What was so important that the Chinooks had to be escorted by 2 of our best gunships? There was gunfire heard in the woodland. What were they shooting at? So they had no permission to use any form of pyrotechnics. So they weren't simulated munitions. These were real munitions.
But the explosion, was there any evidence? You said one was in the sky and one was on the ground.
Yes.
Was there evidence on the ground of what happened? Like, what did it burn? Was that when it knocked over those trees? That, that
yeah.
That? It
took all the trees out. Actually, went almost halfway through the woods. When you looked at the woodland from the common side, it looked like a giant W, but the right-hand valley was lower than the left-hand valley. And if, as I believe now, the green object was fired upon and was under intelligent control and losing altitude, you'd want to make that right-hand valley to clear the mountain. Unfortunately, on the other side of that valley, there's another hill that rises behind it. When we found the debris trail, Stephen and I had followed part of it, but it was exhausting because it's uphill. We decided we'd go back and tell the others what we'd found. And we planned to go up there the very next morning with cameras and follow this debris trail through to its end, because I wanted to find the impact crater. That's what I was looking for. We started off from where Stephen and I had left off the previous day. And the branches and the canopies were all out of these trees in a straight line, as far as the eye could see. And then the trees were in half, 60-foot trees snapped mid-trunk in half. And then it went into an area where there are 6 huge trees, again, 60 feet high, snapped off at 20 feet in the air. And all the surrounding trees seemed to have these white burn marks, but it wasn't ash. It was like a chemical burn and a really pungent smell of, I don't know, like burning rubber, I want to say, or fireworks or something. Nasty smell that was there. And the injuries on the trees, shall we say, that were left standing. One of them had this 2-foot by 1-foot wound, and all the bark was missing. and the living wood had curled outwards towards you, implying something very big and very heavy had been dragged up against these trees. That tree has since been felled, along with all the other trees that were damaged in the debris trail, were all removed by the Forestry Commission in the middle of winter, which is against their own felling license laws, because they can't fell trees in wintertime. They can only do it, I think, between June and August, the end of August. But no, they felled them in December of 2016 and January of 2017 and replanted the whole area.
Okay, so, but before they did that, you were there, right?
Yes.
So if you were looking at this site, were you able, in other words, to see possibly a size of a craft that would have taken in, you know, made the path through the forest, so to speak? In other words, it would have had to be quite big, right? To go
Quite wide, yeah.
and pave.
I would suggest between 20 and 40 feet wide. And for every tree that thing hit, it slowed down. We don't actually believe that it hit the ground, but wedged itself in those trees, because the small reconnaissance and surveillance aircraft that was here, or one of them, ZZ418, call sign Snake 48, the Beechcraft, above top secret aircraft, had moved from here to Smilog Woods. And not just anywhere in Smilog Woods, was circling the exact impact site.
Mm-hmm. But you've also said that then they, this group of people came around, you said later. Was it a week? Were you saying a week later?
Do you know, I'd have to be guessing, but it was a short while after the event, okay. Yes.
But you said they appeared to be looking for something on your side. Not over there in that.
Right. They were searching the field where the pyramid came in. So not come down from outside, it came through.
Right.
And with anything that traverses through space, it will drag something with it, whether that be space rocks or debris of some kind, you know. That's what they were looking for. They were searching to see if this thing had dragged anything with it. Or perhaps something jettisoned off the top of this pyramid when that green object was first jettisoned. I don't know.
Okay, and was there any sense during the time they were there that they found what they were looking for and then left? Or was there a sense that they were unsatisfied? Or, you know, was there any indication like that?
Okay, the people in forensic suits did take something away in a bag. I don't know what that was. They were always looking around themselves and looking behind them to make sure no one was actually watching what they were doing.
Okay, but you did see something, or someone saw something that they took away. You said they
don't know what they took away, right? But they did take something away in a bag.
They took something away in a bag, right?
Yes.
So was there an eyewitness to that?
Yes, but we don't know what was in the bag.
Right. And how big, did they describe how big the bag was?
Just carrier bag size. It wasn't a large bag.
Not huge. Okay.
No.
It's all very fascinating. So is there anything we're missing now? Because you said there have been some developments. Do you want to go into those now, or do you want to kind of, where the other little sort of,
okay, well,
you want to reference?
Yeah, there's a few things that they're not supposed to do. And I found some rather interesting documents. And one of them is the avoidance policy for low-level flying by the Ministry of Defence. And they are not allowed to fly, low-level fly, near a civil airport. We have Cardiff International Airport here. They are not allowed to low-level fly near a medical facility, like the Royal Glamorgan Hospital. They're not allowed to low-level fly over an industrial facility, and the Royal Mint sits on an industrial estate. But the biggest thing is they are not allowed to low-level fly over a residential area of more than 10,000 people. And Clontrissant in 2016 had more than 15,000 people. And the other key facilities are royal households, all within the same breadth of the MOD's avoidance policy. So they broke their own rules and regulations regarding the avoidance policy, which is completely ignored. They're not permitted to fly below 1,000 feet over a residential area. That's contrary to aviation law. But they did that night. And that's the Armed Forces Act 2006, Section 34, 105, 106, and 107. They're not permitted to fly within the minimum safe separation distances. That's 250 feet for the fixed wing aircraft and 100 feet for helicopters. But the two C-17s that flew over my head were wingtip to wingtip. They were not 250 feet apart. And the helicopters, the Apaches, were one above two, and they were not 100 feet apart. And that's contrary to the Joint Services Publication Regulations 2330, Section 110. The use of identification friend or foe, or IFF and secondary radar systems, were switched off that night. And that's why we could not track them on radar. And they're not allowed to do that either. And that's contrary to Regulations 2330, subsection 3, section 21. They are not permitted to land aircraft on private land without prior written permission from the landowner, which they never had. And that's contrary to Regulations for Training Over Private Land Act, section 6, and contrary to aviation law, landing and taking off within congested or residential areas in open air assemblies. They're not permitted to use pyrotechnics, munitions on private land without prior written permission. It's contrary to Regulations over Training Over Private Land Act, section 30A, but they did. They're not permitted to use red flares in any training, for any training purpose on private land. They're not allowed to use them. And that's contrary to Training Over Private Land Act, section 30D. They're not permitted, as you know, to low-level fly over a population of more than 10,000 people. And that's contrary to the MOD's avoidance policy. You know about the medical facilities and other key establishments. They are not permitted to fly within 3 nautical miles of a laterally of a NOTAM boundary or within 500 feet of the upper limit. And that's contrary to the exercises and training areas of the UK, MIA, AIP, ENR 522, section 5227D. And I had somebody recently say to me, a NOTAM is not a boundary. It absolutely is a boundary, and they are not allowed to fly within 3 nautical miles of a boundary for a NOTAM. But they did that night when they exceeded it by over 50 miles. Now, there's been a big thing made about this NOTAM because this NOTAM was put out at 9 o'clock on the night of Thursday, the 25th of February, 2016, just a few hours before this incident took place. And we've had some answers back regarding this NOTAM. And
can you wait 1 second? What is this? I don't understand the word you're using.
The NOTAM is a notice to airmen.
Oh.
And it's an excluded airspace for military purposes. And they use these in exercises quite a lot, but they also use them in real operations. Now, a notice to airmen has to be applied for 28 days before it goes out. Well, there's an awful lot of planning involved for a notice to airmen. So we asked the National Air Traffic Services, and quite recently, because I wanted to know specific times for this NOTAM. What time was the application made for the NOTAM to be placed in this particular area? Could you please provide a list of what aircraft and vehicles will be listed to be part of this NOTAM? What time did the official NOTAM get issued for this area? Can you please provide a map of the NOTAM outlining the borders and boundaries for this said exercise? The timing is very important. And we had a response from unfortunately, pardon, the National Air Traffic Services. So this is from the authorities. This is case number 1332568. It's part of the public record if people want to look this up. Thank you for your recent inquiry requesting information about this historic NOTAM from the 25th and 26th of February 2016. I have been in touch with our NOTAM team, and unfortunately, they've been unable to find any information regarding this NOTAM. No information is held. So this NOTAM was not planned.
Right.
This NOTAM was inserted last minute, just a few hours before this incident started. So that's the NOTAM dealt with. But there are other things that they should have done and didn't do over private land. They did not adhere to the country code. And I know that sounds a bit silly, but the country code, contrary to section 10, to keep the noise and interference to an absolute minimum, particularly in the vicinity of dwellings and livestock, especially during lambing season. Now, I wonder how many people lost their sheep that night. This is not a joke. This is how people make their living. And the reason why sheep worrying is a crime is because when a sheep gets scared, it aborts its fetus. But there was no consideration for people that night.
This was the season for them to have
Yes.
lambs?
Yes.
Oh, very interesting. Okay. Now, it sounds like you could go on and on with this. I do want to say that from the sound of what you're talking about, everything appears, even with the documented evidence, to not have been planned ahead of time.
Right.
Although there was a 3-day window, obviously, with the planes circling above in your neighborhood, where they knew something 3 days in advance. They didn't know it
Right.
28 days in advance. So it wasn't an exercise, as you say. You've really convinced me, and I think the viewer, of that. So it's not an exercise. They didn't get the permissions necessary, and they basically didn't, no one was even the wiser until 3 days before it happened.
Right.
Now, it's very interesting to think about that. Why would they know 3 days in advance that something was coming?
Okay. Ross Coulthard, a very respected Australian journalist, has recently let it slip or leaked the information from a gentleman called Bob Fish that has above top secret clearance and fitted the comms for the White House, that the Ministry of Defense and also the United States Air Force have been monitoring for a frequency to know, quote, when these craft are going to appear. They're using satellites to monitor for this frequency. The frequency is beamed to the E3 Sentries. The E3 Sentries put it out to the smaller reconnaissance and surveillance aircraft that come down to, shall we say, ground level, if you like, to pinpoint where this frequency is strongest.
Okay, but I have an issue here, because they obviously did it 3 days before the actual so-called frequency would have shown up.
Perhaps this frequency was getting stronger. We don't know. They trained for this the week before. How long is this conduit? How long in advance do they know they're coming?
Well, you know, and there are interesting things going on here. See, the reason I'm getting at this stuff is that, and this is true of the Rendlesham incident as well. In other words, there's evidence that various ET races will notify militaries if they're going to be in the area ahead of time. And that's actually kind of so that the military then puts out a greeting sort of team, if you want to call it that. And then, but at the same time that they're notified, they don't know what this ET race is coming necessarily to do, or why they're coming, or, you know, all those different questions one might have. They might wonder about these things. They might even ask the group about these things, but they might not get answers, which in you know, again, in this situation, it is also not that easy, I don't think. You said there was something like 50 of these quite all these different craft there in a circle and so and so?
No, David said 15 or 20.
15 or 20. Okay.
Right.
And so they had to be scrambled, we would call, right? To be there at that moment.
Oh, they had an ambush waiting for them.
And that was established, you would say, by the planes for the first 3 days, had somehow in their travels established a need for more reinforcements. Or, you know, it really does sound like they had advance notice of this. And it was obviously not training. It was a real meeting that was going to happen. And then they brought in their stuff. But it also appears that it was somehow it was an awkward situation because of, first of all, the team coming later, trying to find something on the ground indicates that not everything was handled. And that there's also this idea that they're in a very awkward position if a group of ETs decide they want to land or bring their craft in over a neighborhood, right? Because inevitably they're going to have unwanted eyes upon them, you know, people like you, very astute witnesses, right? That even the ETs may contact even when they are there in the vicinity. And it does, if I recall, there was a sense that you were contacted, wasn't there?
Yes, indeed.
Can you describe that?
I think I already have, but
Well, you mean the scanning?
yes.
Okay, okay, I have other questions as well, so I don't have to dwell on this, but based on our prior interviews, I got the impression that you somehow, I don't know if it was after the incident or before the incident, that you had a sense of something. And that I've also wondered whether, you know, has your house been searched? Has there been any evidence that you have been under surveillance, you know, even weeks before the incident, let alone after the incident?
Not before the incident. Certainly I was threatened after the incident. Yeah, and
threatened by
military. By military.
Can you describe that?
I was contacted, this is some 20 months after the event now, and I hadn't spoken to anybody about it once I was interrogated by the mainstream media. I didn't go out of my house for 18 months. And Gary Jones had been trying to find me on Facebook.
Okay, wait, I'm sorry. Why couldn't you go out of your house after you'd been contacted by the media? What do you mean? Did you have crowds around it? Or, I mean,
no. I was just afraid.
Afraid of?
I was just afraid.
Of what?
Of everything. This changed my life completely. Absolutely turned my world upside down. I didn't know how to deal with it. I really didn't. It completely scared the hell out of me, to be honest with you.
Okay, now
I mean, this wasn't a welcoming committee. This was an ambush of the greatest magnitude. They didn't come to say hello. They came to pursue them and shoot them down.
Okay,
I mean, we've got witnesses.
Okay, but what I wanted to know from you was actually more, you know, you say you were afraid after the fact, because you also said you weren't afraid during the incident. Right?
No, after the fact, after I was lent on by the mainstream media, after I was interrogated about who I'd spoken to and how I had spoken to them.
Were you afraid of the government, or were you afraid of the media? Were you afraid the ETs might come back? I mean, I understand that you had trauma, but what do you know specifically which group was terrorizing in your mind? Which was
the government, absolutely. I didn't know what was going to happen to me. As I say, I didn't know you weren't supposed to talk about UFOs. Nobody seemed to be able to find me, especially the UFO group that eventually tracked me down. It was as if every search they did, they couldn't find me. And yet I was there. I wasn't hiding, you know, on Facebook. I think the UFO group, what actually broke the block, if you like, was, excuse me, they put up a blog to say they were doing a skywatch on top of the Garth Mountain. And I made a simple one-line comment underneath to say, it's a good place to be. And from there, they were able to make contact with me. And then other people made contact with me and making, they wanted me to show them the area, which I did. And this one person that had been a member of multiple UFO groups on Facebook had contacted me because he wanted to see the site. And when I was explaining to him what had happened, he wasn't trying to visualize. He was remembering. One of the things that I have since this event is I can feel people's feelings. And that sounds stupid, but it's true. I know when people are lying to me. Mm-hmm. But from that meeting, I was asked what it was I wanted. I said I didn't want anything for myself. I was threatened with perhaps a fatal car accident that extended to my family. And that's when I decided that I would go public. Because no one's going to threaten my family. And if I'd stayed silent then, no one would have known anything.
Okay, now, when you're in all these positions, I think because you're such an astute witness, could you remind us of what your job was, your life work, what were you involved in, whatever significant jobs you might have had that made you the way you are? Because you almost seem, with all due respect, you almost seem like you might have had a military background because of the way you relate facts.
I was a senior security officer for Wales and the West of England. I was an area supervisor for Wales and the West of England.
They definitely didn't bargain on you being on such being able to see the events that happen so clearly and then also report them. So that was.
Well, I think when you have a traumatic event, no matter what that trauma might be in your life, you will remember that trauma in absolutely precise detail for the rest of your life.
I agree. I mean, I've had my own sightings, so I understand that. But still, the extra layer of your security background, that training, that's a training, right? As an observer and then a recording of facts without an emotional overlay, even if you do have emotions about it. Right.
Right.
So in light of everything that's happened, and now we're several years later, right?
Right.
And then you said, is it just recently that they've started to try to they did this with Rendlesham, certainly. They would unearth it. They'd also did it with the Roswell incident, and maybe some other ones as well, where they bring it out suddenly when it's almost been forgotten about, really, and try to put an overlay that's completely false on the incident.
Right. They've been trying to backfill since the incident, and since I published all of their freedom of information requests in the book. Gary and I actually published the first 5 years of the investigation, which is free on Amazon if anybody wants it. If you've got Wonderful. Kindle or you're an Amazon Prime member, then you can get it for free.
I want it. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, absolutely.
To show the lies and contradictions.
Yeah, could you hold up the book one more time?
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
So our viewers could see that.
It's called the Pentyrch Incident, the greatest UFO cover-up in modern times. It has all of the freedom of information requests. And this is not a story. This is all their lies and contradictions. It has all of the reference numbers in there. All of the freedom of information requests are part of the public record. So you can type that reference number in and that freedom of information request will come up so you can read it for yourself. But it's in the book. No official governing body or anyone was told anything about this so-called exercise beforehand. I think in this, we've caught them out on at least, I would have liked to have just caught them out once, but to catch them out lying at least 7 times But it's more than that now. It's into double figures now. I mean, yet again, we're waiting for a Freedom of Information request from South Wales Police that we've been waiting for since August of last year. And it's simple questions, but they can't answer me because they can't. I mean, they actually answered, we can neither confirm or deny we hold the information. And I said, well, they can't say that. You can't, that's a heading. You either confirm you have the information or you deny you have the information. You can't say we can neither confirm or deny, or nothing would ever get answered. So they're wriggling. But if they don't answer this time, we're going to hold them in contempt. And that's contempt of court. That's them facing criminal charges, because I know this was real. And the one thing I haven't said to them yet was, I saw this. They came to me. So what were they? Because I'm not going to accept that nothing happened when I was there and I saw it. And I'm not the only witness, but I am the only one that will speak out publicly about it with the support of so many other witnesses that have come forward, not publicly, but have written emails, that have given us statements.
Well, what about this? I'm very interested in this particular man that you said was asking you about the incident. I can't remember if you said you met him in person or not, but you said there was something about him that lent you to believe that he had seen it as opposed.
Oh, he was part of that operation. Absolutely. No shadow of a doubt.
Okay.
He was part of that operation.
In other words, do you think he was military? Do you think it was NSA? Do you think, I mean, who do you think he was from the base?
Military. I think he was military.
And was
he could have even been one of the pilots. I don't know, but he was definitely military.
Okay. So he could have been, all right, fair enough. But was he just trying to get his sort of tone? Was he sympathizing with you? Was he trying to come on side, as they say in Britain?
No, not at all. He was sent to find out what it was I wanted.
I see.
And when I said I didn't want anything for myself, that it didn't really matter what happened to me, because I felt like I was on borrowed time anyway. I said, my word will still stand anyway. He said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, I've taken 3 polygraph tests. And then his attitude changed.
Oh, really?
So
he didn't know about the polygraph tests. Are these
no.
in the public domain?
Or they are. They're in the book.
Did he?
They're in the book. All right. Please get the book. It's in the book.
Did he not do his homework? That's what I'm curious.
No, I think he was sent to find out specifically what it was I wanted. And when I said I didn't want anything for myself, I should have asked him for the truth, shouldn't I? Or who these people were. But, you know, hindsight is a wonderful thing.
You said his attitude changed when you told him you took a polygraph test.
Yes.
That would tend to lead one to believe that prior to that, he didn't know you took one, and it changed his view of you.
It perhaps changed his view about what he intended to do.
Right. But still, it was knowledge that he didn't have when he walked in, and this was
right.
In person?
Yes, this was in person.
And when was that approximately?
22 months after the event.
Quite a time after.
Yeah, well, the UFO group only got involved 20 months after the event, because that was the first time they were able to find me.
Wow.
Not because I wasn't there, just because every search they had done for me, it didn't come up. And yet, this
incident was in the newspaper at the time, right?
Oh yes, this not the UFOs, but the military exercise was in the newspaper at the time. Yes.
Oh, okay. So the cover-up was already published.
Yeah, and the military were in at community level from the off, making simple one-line comments. It was a military exercise hours before anybody knew it was a military exercise. Mm-hmm. In local hubs where you have to be a member.
So you say there were other witnesses and none of them have come into the public?
Not into the public eye, no.
That's incredible. Now, what about witnesses in the hospital? Anybody come forward from the hospital?
They've made statements, yes.
Public.
But they're not prepared to speak out as I have.
In front of a camera.
Right.
Anyone? Okay, so no one's tried to interview people at the hospital.
No, since the event, and we've had 2 members of staff come forward from the hospital that night I do believe that the members of staff at the Royal Glamorgan Hospital have been placed under a gagging order.
Oh, right.
Hence the backfilling that's been attempted by both the hospital and the police since this event.
Now, were there any photographers taking pictures of the area where the trees were mowed down and the way they were at that time before the whole place got replanted? Are there remaining photos?
We videoed the whole area.
Oh, you did?
On the morning of the 27th.
Is that on
Sorry?
the video, is it on your website?
I'm not sure if it's on the website, but it's certainly in some of the presentations that we've done.
Okay, because I mean, that's quite a substantial evidence of this, right?
Right.
Of something crashing.
It takes a hell of a lot of kinetic energy to snap one tree, but to snap as many as it did, and then in the impact area itself, there are 6 trees that were 60 feet tall that have been snapped mid-trunk, which is an impossibility in nature. It's a huge amount of energy to have done that. You know, you can smash your car into a tree and it won't snap.
Okay, now I think I probably asked you this in other interviews, but I'm going to ask it again. Were you aware of any missing time during the incidents?
Not at the time, but since, yes.
So meaning since you've had missing time in your life since, or since you remember having missing time?
No, I didn't know I had missing time at all. And it was only because of the investigation that Gary Jones has done regarding the military timeline, and now knowing the time of the explosion, that my stomach flipped, because I knew then that we'd lost over an hour in time. Before then, I had no idea whatsoever that I'd lost any time whatsoever. We were stood at the gate, as far as I was concerned, 10, 15 minutes, we were back in the house. But I do remember being so cold, dead cold, you know, like a piece of meat, as if we'd been out there for hours, but we hadn't. And it was then that I realized, oh my God, where's that hour gone? And it's more like an hour and a half that's missing. Mm-hmm. But I didn't know, and now I do.
So since then, have you had any dreams, any visions, any feelings that you've been contacted by, let's say, off-world intelligences, that sort of thing?
Yes, I have. But I don't really want to discuss that.
All right.
I might discuss it with you.
I'd love to.
But not on air.
All right, fair enough. Well, this is not unusual. You know, obviously people that get quite involved in sightings, especially ones to the degree that yours was, often have missing time, often have contact afterwards that continues.
The visions are extremely religious.
Really?
Yeah.
That's fascinating. All right. Now, in terms of, you know, we're so many, I mean, we've gone through the whole COVID thing, et cetera, et cetera. Do you feel like your brain was rewired at all, you know, so that you see things differently? Because you said you hear things or you sense people's thoughts and all that. But in your own thoughts, in your own, you know, equipment, being your brain and your sort of abilities and so on, do you feel that something has changed about your brain, the way you think about things, something like that? Indeed.
And I also have knowledge that I haven't learned for myself, which is hard to explain.
All right. Well, maybe we can, you know, at a later date explore that because, you know, you become more willing to talk about it if you do. Just throwing that out there. Now, have you contemplated writing like a book about your, you know, of your real, you know, sort of personal experience through the whole thing and a tell-all kind of thing?
Well, most of it about the night in question is in the book. So I haven't gone into detail about my life, although there is some things in there about me personally. Mm-hmm. As I say, it's not a story, it's a presentation of the evidence. And with the mounting amount of evidence that we have, there's probably going to be a second book to accommodate the amount of evidence that we have in the second part of the investigation, because this investigation will never stop. We've been to the Home Office. You know, I'm serious about this. I want questions asked. What the military did that night was totally illegal. Totally illegal.
Right. Now, I have a strange question for you. Have you ever been contacted by anyone from the Rendlesham Forest incident?
No, I haven't. No, I haven't.
Okay, well, just briefly, I do want to say I was in England before the whole COVID thing struck, I think it was. Or was it? Not sure exactly when I was there, but I started looking, you know how they re-unearth things, and I started looking back into the Rendlesham incident right before I went to the UK. And then during the time I was there, I was trying to find witnesses to talk to. And we were actually, they tried to kill us. So late at night, we had a black SUV on a country road with no one else around, a two-lane road. And it was relatively dark, but it was in an area that my partner, he was driving, knew. And we were in a little car, but we had a big SUV headed straight for us in our lane. And no matter how we flashed our lights or did anything, this car did not waver in any way, shape, or form. And we had to go into the opposite line of traffic, if there was going to be a traffic there, in order to avoid it.
That happened to me.
At no point, it was like driven by automatons or something.
When I went up to see Richard Hall on the 28th of February 2016, just 2 days after this event, because I was desperate to tell someone, and I didn't even know who Richard Hall was. But I needed to tell someone, anyone that would know what to do. On my way back from that conference, we were nearly rammed off the road by a black SUV.
All right.
And that's in the book, Kerry. Please
All right.
Get the book.
Okay, well, then we've both been sort of faced with that sort of thing. And this incident happened to us like around 12 midnight or after. So
Yeah, just after midnight.
Yeah. All right. Now, I know I've really been grilling you here, but it is a fascinating story, and I'm so interested to hear, you know, about it. I think there's a lot there, as you say, that hasn't come to light even. And I'm really fascinated to hear more about it. So is there anything that you haven't said that you'd like to say?
Well, there's a couple of things I would like to say regarding what they should have done and didn't do, including, very briefly, identification. It reads like this: it is their duty, and they must identify themselves if asked to do so, with their name, rank, and unit number. Any persons questioning service personnel on private land must be presumed that they have a valid reason for doing so. Therefore, the utmost courtesy must be extended to them. Parties of service personnel or individuals are not to avoid any person attempting to question them. That is contrary to regulations of the Private Land Act, Section 26B. But they did when they lied to us and then tried to cover it up. And no exercise has ever been listed for the men and women that camped in the fields here to this date. They were a covert operation, which means that this was a real situation. And the only reason we have never had people camp in the fields before or since.
Right. Fascinating.
But they're also not allowed to close the footpaths. That's contrary to the Public Right of Way Act in this country.
That's right.
Even in an exercise, the footpaths have to remain open. There is no legal mechanism to close the footpaths. If you want to walk up the footpath in the middle of one of their exercises and smell the flowers and have a picnic while they're firing blanks at each other, you're more than welcome to do so. And that's contrary to the Public Rights of Way Act in this country, and also a breach of your statutory rights.
Mm.
But they did, when they closed all the roads and all the footpaths and prevented people going into Smarlock Woods.
Right.
So there's a lot more about the regulations that they broke. In fact, I think I did a small summary of what they should have done and didn't do. I mean, there are no risk assessments or environmental surveys. They had no written permission to train over private land or to land on private land. They broke aviation law multiple times in both minimum heights and separation distances. They ignored the avoidance policy and they ignored the silent hours order. That's why I love the military, because they work to the letter by the letter. They don't question orders, they follow them. Only in this case, they didn't. They ignored the Public Rights of Way Act, the country code. They ignored the NOTAM boundary, which they would never do in an exercise. They ignored the regulations about low-level flying over a residential area of more than 10,000 people. There is no risk assessment or environmental assessment. They did not liaise with the public. Hundreds of people called the police that night because they were worried for their livestock that were being worried. So the farmers union wasn't told either, and they have to be, because they tell their farmers if there's going to be an exercise to put their stock in the barns to protect them. Mm-hmm. Nothing was done. The press weren't told, local government weren't told, no one was told. And without that, no application for training over private land would ever have been granted. They've lied.
I want to stop you there because I think you've really proved your point in those regards. I'm sure you have a very long list there, and you can send it to me. I'll post it on your page if you wish, as well as a link to your book, etc. But what I want to ask you though is about your the person who doesn't want to come forward, and whether you've been in touch with that person on a one-to-one basis.
Yes, he lives locally.
Right. So have you guys ever discussed the incident just between you?
He doesn't like to talk about it, to be honest with you. We were polar opposites on the night, and I think this really did scare him. He has spoken to other people about it, and even then, he's like this, behind his hands when he's talking, because it scares him. Huh. We have had a new witness come forward from the village that saw the red lights in the fields and heard the planes go over. We witnesses right throughout South Wales. But again, all of their sightings are fleeting. We've a witness in Betws in Bridgend that said that they saw the comment made on the day was that the RAF jets and helicopters were pursuing a cluster of lights. Well, I contacted the witness and said, look, I know those lights weren't white, so what colour were they? And he told me green. So I know that he saw them. So military jets and helicopters were pursuing a cluster of green lights, and they continuously headed west. So we've got witnesses in Bridgend, in Neath, in Port Talbot, in Swansea, in Gowerton, and all the way out to sea. But all of their testimony is so fleeting because, like I say, it happens so fast. So they can't write pages and pages of statements because what they saw only lasted a few seconds. The important part is that they saw them. Okay. I'd ask...
Sorry?
I was just going to say, I would ask all witnesses, no matter how small or insignificant you think your sighting is, please come through the website. Please come to me. I will keep your details confidential. You don't even have to give me your details if you don't wish to do so. But please, what you saw is vitally important to this case, and I need everybody's help on this.
Okay, now I have a funny question for you, but it's a little bit serious as well. So you never got visited by Men in Black?
Not as far as not what Men in Black would be known as, no. No, although there have been strange... They wear
black suits.
Right.
They actually, and then sunglasses. And sometimes I know it's insane, at least in America, but they actually do drive these late model cars. And not to spook you completely, but Dan Burish actually said that they actually are animated dead bodies that are animated by ETs.
Well, we've had some strange people here. We had a man and a woman that were witnessed by other people in the village whilst out walking. And these people seem to be like cut from the same cloth. Chiseled, very strange features. And they just disappeared. As I say, it's all farmland here. There are nothing that you can hide behind. And they literally just turned into a field. And when these people went to see where they'd gone, they'd vanished, completely vanished. And there was nowhere for them to go. Absolutely nowhere. It was open land. But they were blue-eyed, very chiseled cheeks.
Right.
Like they were almost brother and sister, like they'd been made from the same mold. And they didn't behave normally. So that's the description that I've had.
Yeah, very good. Now, are there any other, you're in a small community. So was there anyone that came asking questions besides the man that you described?
Yes, we had a man contact me directly after speaking to Richard Hall, which really put me on the back foot because he wanted to meet me in Smilog Woods of all places. And I thought, I'm not going to go and meet a complete stranger in the middle of the woods, Yes. As crazy as I am. So I met him at the Royal Glamorgan Hospital because they have CCTV there. And he wanted to go and see the crash site, which he did. Of course, it was snowing in the field where the pyramid came in, and it was snowing at the crash site, which he was able to witness. He seemed to be taking measurements for something. I don't know who he was, but he wasn't who he said he was. He was too well groomed to have been as dressed down as he was. Let's put it that way. And spoke too well to have been down and out.
Right. Very interesting. Okay. Well, you know what this does, though, because this is like 2016, this is not that long ago in, terms of UFO history and all of that. And it does show you that governments don't have it all together when they're dealing with these craft and these beings, right?
Right.
That's, I think, perfectly evident that they were kind of flying by the seat of their pants, even though they appear to be given a warning of some kind 3 days in advance. So that's interesting. This is kind of strange to say, but did it occur to you or anyone else that those Russian planes that had been spotted, I don't know if it was days or months or weeks in advance of this situation happening, that they could have been alerted of something and were looking for it?
Okay. Yes, it has occurred to us because it was exactly 1 week before that the Russian planes were here.
Right.
The International Space Station had Tim Peake on board at the time, who gave an early high five to Wales, specifically for an early St. David's Day. So they were watching Wales. But the NASA Earthwatch has all been deleted for the week up to and including the 26th of February 2016. And then it goes back to normal.
Oh, right.
So every single day has been deleted, which is also very interesting. So yes, this is a global phenomena, shall we say, that everyone seems to be involved behind the scenes. And as much as the military knew that they were coming, they couldn't stop them.
Right. Okay, this is my last question, I think, and it is this. Was there any visits to your local community during or after this time that, or maybe closer to the time, of what would appear to be people with Asian type features.
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Wondered.
There are various races out, of visitors. And sometimes there are some certain groups that do look like that. And I was just curious. All right, well, really, really fascinating. I'd love to get, the best photos you can have, if you can send to me to put on the page for people, if that's even possible. And if you said you had a video or something of the mowed down trees, that would also be great to have. So if you feel comfortable doing this, I don't want to get you, in any sense of, being afraid or any of that stuff. But I get a lot of viewers, and I know people will be very, very interested. So
I'm past being afraid now, I think.
Okay.
My neck's been on the line since I came forward, and whatever will be, will be.
Yeah.
I believe so strongly that we have a right to know what's going on, regardless, for better or for worse. We should be told. And, I have a strength inside of me that is so difficult to keep under control. That is not my own. And sometimes it comes out so passionately that I try to suppress it, to have a little bit of grace, but it almost tries to escape out of me faster than I can talk. I can't put it in any other plainer words than that. But there is a strength inside of me that is not mine, that compels me to come forward.
Okay. Well, what about your interactions with electronics? Have you seen a difference? Do you have some contactees, including myself, have the ability to turn street lights on and off, to, affect electronics in various ways? Have you noticed anything like that?
No, but I do have a sixth sense that I didn't have before. Mm-hmm. It affected me medically, shall we say. It's altered my electoral dermal wave permanently. Is completely unchanging, constant and unchanging, like a signal inside of me that I didn't know about until I took the polygraph tests. I wasn't aware that it was there, but it is there. I would like anyone, to have a look at that if possible, to see if it's some kind of message or download or something. But it nearly killed me. It nearly killed me.
What do you mean? Why did it nearly kill you? I mean, how?
Well, as you know, the heart has electronic waves, shall we say, that goes through it. And over the year of 2016, I had small changes that were occurring medically to me. And initially, I didn't put them all together. And it was only, it accumulated that 2016 going into 2017 on New Year's Eve. And I hadn't had any alcohol. I only wish I had. My heart decided to close down, and it opened up all my veins and arteries. Effectively, I was suffocating, but I saw this happening to me before it happened. I actually asked my daughter, please buy some aspirin, because I see myself having a heart attack. And she laughed at me. I said, no, entertain an old lady here. Just buy me some aspirin. So she did. I had the premonition of this happening to me before it happened. It wasn't a heart attack, but I literally bust through my chest muscles in order to breathe. And the consultant nearly floored me when he pressed my chest where I damaged these muscles. But it nearly, as I say, nearly killed me.
How long after the incident was that?
That happened on New Year's Eve of 2016 going into 2017, so 10 months.
Okay.
So there was this transition gradually over the year, becoming anaphylactic when I wasn't before. Now I am. becoming allergic to a vitamin tablet I've taken my entire life, and not the tablet itself, but the coating on that tablet. Just very, very small things that seem to change over the period of 10 months, and then I nearly died.
Had any, I don't mean to alarm you, but I also know that certain people get told through various people, like, have you had your dentist or your doctor or another dentist or doctor try to encourage you to go and have a checkup? Who didn't know anything or whatever. Have you had any encouragement to go, you know, have medical procedures done or something?
I'm always at the dentist. But
are?
yeah. I get on very well with my dentist. Medical procedures. I have to go in and have an operation. But I've asked for him to do it under a local anaesthetic because I won't be knocked out for it. That scares me. I don't know that I'm not going to wake up again. So I'd rather.
Is it possible for you to bring someone with you to make sure you do wake up again?
I wouldn't.
I would advise.
I'm not going to have a general anaesthetic.
I know, I understand, but I wouldn't go alone. I mean this because I know too many people who have had incidental things, not big, who after certain things that went on with them where the, you know, national security agencies or whatever you want to call them had special interest in them, and they go in and, you know, they never come out again.
Well, the one thing that really scares me is being hypnotically regressed. And I was contacted by a doctor via my website that's offered his services for free.
Right.
But I think the angle was to have me go in there to find out where this missing time has come from or gone. And the one thing I'm particularly worried about is perhaps a trigger word that they use under hypnosis. That is a possibility. When you have 4 doctors that have spent their life saving lives, to suddenly receive a phone call, go out, get in a car and set themselves on fire, just doesn't add up to, you know, first do no harm, you know, which is exactly what happened.
Well, you also could have a situation in which, you know, just, I don't know what I'm trying to say here. Just the you know, there could be a situation in which you do have an interaction like that, but it would be under your terms and under your circumstances, and then someone that would be sort of highly trusted, et cetera, et cetera. Last question, I swear. Have you seen any ETs or pictures of ETs or ETs in movies or whatever that sort of freaked you out or made you think that it could be the beings that you interacted with?
No. I didn't see any of Spielberg's funny looking aliens, you know, but these craft themselves seem to be alive, seem to be conscious. And they were afraid. You know, they tried to hide from the helicopters. They ran. And the helicopters herded them all together and chased them. And that doesn't sound like anything that's hostile to me. Mm-hmm. You know, if the Carl Winston witnesses said that one of these green barrels had tried to hide in the field next to his house in Colwinston, and the helicopters were sweeping left and right across the field searching for it. Again, very low. And once they were almost upon it, it's jumped up and it skipped away west, you know, to join the others, because that's what they did. They herded them all together. You know, some people have said to me, why didn't they just take off into space? Well, again, perhaps we presume too much. Perhaps they couldn't because they've arrived in another craft, you know. Mm-hmm. But for me, they weren't hostile. And that's not to say that they weren't, but to me, they did not appear hostile.
Yeah, I wasn't even asking that, but I mean, it's good that you volunteered that. I'm just saying, I was only wondering, you know, sometimes you can have something happen and then all of a sudden you can have a triggering event where you see something or someone, could even be a cover of a book, could be in a movie, could be just a flash that will then trigger a memory. And that's all I was asking was.
No, I've had visions, but nothing like that.
Okay.
And premonitions also.
Okay. All right. Well, I think this has been, you know, fascinating, and, you know, you're so very present with it and very straightforward. And I think it's great for people to hear, you know, a witness account like yours. So thank you so much, Kaz, for coming back to me and coming forward again. And, you know, I know it's not easy. I know it can actually use a lot of energy to do something like this, but thanks very much, because anything that extends our understanding of, you know, how we're being contacted, how the militaries are dealing with this, good or bad, you know what I'm saying? Whether the contact is good or bad. I mean, there's a lot of different aspects to these things. And so I think it's a very worthwhile pursuit, so to speak. And so.
Well, thank you, Kerry, for having me back on your show. And I especially like the live shows because there is no script. You know, I don't know the questions you're going to ask me. And I said to you before the show started, you can ask me anything you want and I'll answer it because I have absolutely nothing to hide. This incident was real. And I don't ask people to believe me. I ask people to look at the evidence in this case, you know, because it was real. So thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Thanks everyone for watching, and have a good Friday night. John Lear has passed on, and I'm going to do a show later tonight with Sean David Morton. It's very impromptu. I think we're going to have a special guest on that show. It'll be at 7 p.m. California time. So wherever you are in the world, we're in Pacific time here. If you want to join us, if you know John Lear, or knew John Lear, and you want to maybe even say something on the show, then you can contact me via email or on Skype. My Skype is Snow Jaguar, and let me know in advance and bring you on, or even during the show. So thank you again, Kaz, for being here, and please do stay in touch with us.
I will. Thank you, Kerry.
All right. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.